Ethan had always been just another soldier in the vast military machine of Earth. He never imagined that his quiet life on a far-off planet would be anything but routine. Stationed at a remote outpost on the edge of human space, his job was to help maintain peace between humans and the many alien species they interacted with. But everything changed the day Lyra arrived. Lyra was unlike anyone Ethan had ever met. She was an alien princess, sent to the human base after a conflict between her people and a rival species had escalated. The alien factions were locked in a tense standoff, and her role was crucial. Yet, the moment she walked into the base, it was clear she wasn't like the others. She was different, strong yet gentle, poised yet curious, and there was a certain warmth in her eyes that immediately drew Ethan in. Ethan had been tasked with overseeing her security. He was assigned to make sure Lyra stayed safe while peace talks were underway. At first, he didn't understand why he had been chosen. After all, there were more experienced soldiers who could handle such a high-profile task. But something about the way Lyra looked at him, with those deep eyes full of questions, made him feel like maybe he was where he was meant to be. The first few days were tense. Lyra was the last person he expected to connect with. She wasn't just a princess with a title. She was a person, someone with dreams, fears, and hopes just like him. They spent their days in formal meetings and brief conversations about diplomacy. But as time passed, they began to talk more. It started with small things, like Lyra asking about Earth's history or the foods they ate. Ethan found himself surprised by how interested she was in human life. She wasn't just doing her duty. She genuinely wanted to understand. One afternoon, when they were walking through the gardens near the base, Lyra stopped and turned to him. "Ethan," she said quietly, "tell me something about Earth that no one else would know." Ethan paused, caught off guard by the question. He had always been taught to focus on his duties, to stay on task. But here was Lyra asking about something real, something personal, I guess. He started, unsure. "We have a lot of different cultures. It's like how a single place can be so different depending on where you are. You might be in a busy city or a quiet town, but it all feels like home." Lyra smiled softly. "I think that's beautiful." Ethan felt something stir in his chest. It was a strange feeling, something he couldn't quite name. It was like he was seeing her in a new light. She wasn't just an alien princess, someone from a far-off world. She was a person with thoughts and feelings, just like him. Over the next few days, their bond grew. They shared stories, Lyra, telling him about her home planet, the struggles her people faced, and the burdens she carried as a royal. In return, Ethan shared his own stories, the ones from his childhood, his struggles, and his reasons for joining the military. She listened intently, never judging, always curious. There was one night, after a long day of talks, when Lyra came to Ethan's quarters, the air between them felt different, charged somehow. Lyra was wearing a simple dress made of soft fabric that shimmered under the lights. She had an elegance about her, but there was also a sense of sadness that lingered in her eyes. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm, "tell me about love." Ethan blinked, surprised by the question. Love? What did she mean by that? "Love," he repeated, unsure. "Well, it's complicated. You can love your family, your friends, but sometimes love can be more than that. It's when someone becomes part of you, even if you're apart. He paused, unsure how to explain. Something that makes you feel whole. Even if you don't always know how to show it." Lyra nodded, looking away for a moment, as though deep in thought. Ethan felt an unspoken connection between them. He knew there was something more, but he couldn't quite place it. Was it just him, or did she feel it too? The next few days were a blur of tense meetings and uncertain moments. The peace talks were nearing their end, and Lyra's presence on the base was no longer as urgent. The looming threat of war still hung over everyone. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something would change once the talks were over. He didn't want to think about, he didn't want to consider the possibility that Lyra would leave, and he would never see her again. One evening, after a long day, Lyra asked if they could meet outside. Ethan agreed, and they walked in silence to a quiet spot near the edge of the base. The stars above were bright, and the air was cool. A A perfect night for a conversation. "I've been thinking," Lyra began, her voice quieter than usual. "When I return to my people, I'll be bound by my duties. It'll be hard to be free again. You ever feel like you're trapped by your choices?" Ethan glanced at her, his heart heavy with the unspoken understanding between them. "I think we all feel trapped sometimes," he replied. "Sometimes we don't have the luxury to choose." Lyra nodded, her expression softening. She looked up at the stars for a long moment before turning to him. "I wonder if there's a world out there where we don't have to choose, where we're free." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know what to say. He had never considered a life outside of his duty. But with Lyra, the possibilities seemed endless. As the night wore on, the weight of their connection became undeniable. Ethan realized for the first time that there was something more between them than simple duty. It wasn't just protecting her. He was beginning to care for her in a way that he didn't understand yet. And then, just as he was about to speak, Lyra turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan, can I ask you one thing before I leave?" Ethan couldn't sleep. The questions that had been building in his mind for days now felt like a storm he couldn't escape. The bond he shared with Lyra was undeniable, and it was growing stronger by the hour. But as much as he wanted to ignore the truth, he knew it. Lyra was going to leave. It was only a matter of time before the peace talks ended, and she would return to her homeworld to fulfill her duties. He had been trying to ignore his feelings. After all, he was just a soldier, nothing more. Lyra, however, was a princess, bound by her responsibilities. She couldn't stay, and he couldn't imagine a life without her. The next day, after another round of talks with alien representatives, Ethan found Lyra sitting in the quiet garden near the base. It was a place they had visited many times, a peaceful corner, where they could talk without the pressure of their positions hanging over them. Lyra had always seemed at ease here, but today she looked troubled. Ethan walked over, his boots soft, on the grass. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" Lyra didn't turn to him at first. She stared at the stars above, her mind clearly elsewhere. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking, Ethan." Took a seat beside her, trying to make himself comfortable. He could tell she was upset, but he wasn't sure how to reach her. They'd always been able to talk, but today felt different. "About what?" he asked carefully. Lyra finally looked at him, her eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to come from deep within. "About everything," she replied softly. "About my life, my duties, and the future I can never escape." Ethan stayed silent, not knowing what to say. Lyra had always been open with him, but now there was something in her tone that told him she was holding something back. "I've never had the freedom to choose for myself," Lyra continued, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "My whole life has been planned out for me. From the moment I was born, I was told what to do, who to marry, where to live. Everything was set, and I never had a say in any of it." Ethan's heart ached for her. He had known that being a princess came with a heavy burden, but hearing her speak about it like this made him realize how much she had sacrificed for the sake of her people. "I never wanted this," Lyra admitted, her eyes searching the stars as if looking for an answer. "I never asked to be a ruler. I wanted to live my own life, to experience the world without all the expectations. But every time I tried to break free, I was reminded of who I am." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to tell her that she didn't have to carry the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders, but he didn't know if that was even possible. She was a princess, a leader, and the fate of her people depended on her choices. "There's more," Lyra said, breaking his thoughts. "I came here because I had no other choice. My people are at war with another faction, and I was sent to secure an alliance with Earth. But when I arrived here, everything changed." Ethan was confused. "What do you mean?" "I thought the talks were going well." "They are," Lyra replied. "But the more time I spent here, the more I realized that I don't want to go back. I don't want to live a life where I'm constantly told what to do. I don't want to be a princess if it means never knowing what it feels like to be truly free." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest.
Was she telling him what he thought she was? Did she want to leave it all behind?
"I've thought about this a lot," Lyra continued. I'm afraid of what my people will do if I abandon my responsibilities. They've always depended on me, but I can't keep living for them. I have to live for myself." Ethan swallowed hard. He knew this was the moment he had been dreading, the moment where everything could change. He had always known that Lyra's duty would come first, that one day she would have to return to her world. But hearing her say these things, it was as though she was giving him a glimpse of the future. And it terrified him. "So what does this mean?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "I don't know, I just need time to figure out what I really want. Need to know if there's more to life than duty, more than just doing what I'm told." Ethan nodded slowly, trying to process her words. He couldn't deny it. He wanted to be the one to help her find that freedom, to show her that there was more to life than what she had been taught. But at the same time, he was afraid of what might happen if she chose that path. "Lyra, you don't have to do this alone," Ethan said quietly. "I'll be here, whatever you decide." She looked at him with a mix of gratitude and fear. "Why? Don't want to drag you into my mess, Ethan. You've got your own life, your own world to worry about. You don't need to be part of mine." Ethan shook his head. "I don't care about any of that. If you want to find a way to be free, I'll help you. I want to help you." Lyra smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he couldn't. "Ignore your kind, Ethan. I don't deserve kindness." Ethan wanted to argue, to tell her that she deserved everything, but he knew that words alone wouldn't change anything. She had to make her own choice. And yet part of him hoped that, somehow, she would choose to stay. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts and fears. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a fleeting connection. This was something deep, something neither of them had expected. "I'll be waiting." "Lyra," Ethan said finally, his voice steady. "Whatever happens, I'll be here." Lyra reached out, her hand brushing against his. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. She didn't have the answers, but at that moment, she knew she didn't have to face the uncertainty alone. The night fell silent around them. Both of them were left wondering what the future would bring, and whether their paths would ever truly align. The days after their conversation felt different. Air seemed thicker, and the tension between Ethan and Lyra was undeniable. It wasn't just the looming threat of the enemy forces that made everything feel heavy. It was something deeper, something neither of them knew how to explain. Ethan's heart raced whenever he saw her, and every moment they spent together felt more precious than the last. Lyra's thoughts seemed consumed by the choice she faced. Ethan could see it in her eyes whenever she looked at him. There was a question there, a question that neither of them had dared to ask aloud, but they both knew it was coming. Neither could hide from the truth any longer. Ethan had always been the kind of person to follow orders, to put duty above all else. But now he found himself questioning everything, his training, his responsibilities, his entire life. The connection he felt with Lyra was unlike anything he had ever experienced. He had never imagined that his life could change so quickly. But here they were, standing on the edge of something neither of them fully understood, the evening before the peace talks were set to end. Lyra asked to speak with Ethan. They met in the same quiet garden where they had shared so many of their conversations. The stars above seemed brighter tonight, as if they, too, were holding their breath for the words that were about to be spoken. Ethan was nervous, but he didn't show it. He had never been good with emotions, never been the type to let his feelings show. But with Lyra, everything felt different. She made him feel things he couldn't explain, things he didn't know he was capable of feeling. Lyra sat on the stone bench, her eyes gazing up at the sky. She looked calm, but Ethan could see the sadness in her eyes. It was the same sadness he had seen before, the one that had haunted her ever since she arrived. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about what we talked about the other night." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. And Lyra turned to face him, her gaze steady but filled with uncertainty. "I've made a decision," she said. "I can't go back to my people. I can't go back to the life that was chosen for me. I want to be free." Can do this alone. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was the moment that everything would change. "I don't want to leave," Lyra continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But if I stay, I'll be bound by my responsibilities forever. I can't live like that anymore. I don't want to live for others. I want to live for myself." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had always known that she was torn, but hearing her say it out loud made it all the more real. She wasn't just asking for freedom. She was asking for a new life. A life that could only happen if someone was willing to stand by her side. "You don't have to do this alone," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "I'm not going anywhere. Lyra, whatever happens, I'm with you. I'll help you. We'll figure it out together." Lyra's eyes softened, and for a moment it felt like the entire universe had paused. She reached out and took his hand, the warmth of her touch sending a surge of electricity through him, but then a look of hesitation crossed her face. She looked away, her fingers lightly brushing his before pulling back. "Ethan, there's one thing I need to ask you. I need you to be honest with me." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the weight of her words, the importance of whatever she was about to ask. He knew this was the moment where everything could change. He braced himself, unsure of what was coming. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely above. A whisper. Lyra took a deep breath, her expression unreadable. "Can you leave everything behind? Can you leave Earth, your family, your duty, and come with me? Will you follow me into the unknown, even if it means abandoning everything you've ever known?" Ethan's heart froze. The question hung in the air, the silence between them deafening. Could he do it? Could he walk away from everything he had ever known for a chance at something he couldn't fully understand? He looked into her eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the same vulnerability he had felt when he first met her. He had always been taught to follow orders, to stay in line, to be part of the larger machine. But now, as he stood here, facing Lyra, he realized that none of that mattered. It wasn't about duty anymore. It was about something deeper, something that pulled him toward her. "I've always followed orders," Ethan said slowly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've always put my duty first. When I'm with you, I don't feel like just a soldier anymore. I feel like I'm something more. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I don't want to lose you. If that means leaving everything behind, then I'll do it." Lyra's eyes widened, a flicker of hope shining through the sadness. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, as if his words had opened something in her that she hadn't known existed. "You would leave everything behind?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You would come with me, even though you don't know what's out there?" Ethan nodded, his heart full of determination. "Yes, I would. For you. For us." For a moment, there was silence. Then Lyra smiled. A smile that lit up her entire face. It was the kind of smile that told Ethan everything he needed to know. She wasn't just asking him to follow her. She was asking him to trust her, to take a leap of faith into the unknown. And in that moment, Ethan knew that there was no turning back. "I'm ready," Lyra whispered. "Let's go." Ethan stood, offering his hand to her. She took it without hesitation, and together, they turned toward the future. A future filled with uncertainty, but also with endless possibilities as they walked side by side. Ethan knew one thing for sure. He had made the right choice, no matter what lay ahead. He would face it with Lyra, and together, they would write their own story. The following days were filled with urgency. The peace talks were coming to a close, and the reality of the situation was setting in. Ethan had made his decision. He had chosen to be with Lyra, to follow her wherever the unknown would take them. Yet, as he looked at the stars above, he couldn't shake the feeling that this decision would change everything about his life. No more military service, no more structure, no more duty. Just him and the unknown journey ahead. Lyra, too, seemed to be weighed down by the enormity of their decision. She had spent her entire life being told what to do, where to go, and what was expected of her. Now, for the first time, she had made a choice for herself, and it scared her more than anything. Could she really leave everything behind? Could she face her people's disappointment? And more than anything, could she find the happiness she had always longed for? Ethan had always been the type of person to follow orders without question. That was what made him a good soldier. But now, with Lyra by his side, he felt like he was no longer just a soldier. He was something more, a person, capable of making his own choices. Choosing his own path, he wasn't sure what would happen next. There were still enemies out there, still factions that could cause chaos. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he could handle whatever came his way. As long as Lyra was with him, he felt like he could take on the universe. The day of the final meeting arrived. Lyra stood at the edge of the base, her gaze fixed on the distance. The wind gently lifted her hair, and for a moment she seemed at peace. Ethan watched her from a distance, trying to figure out what was going on in her mind. He could tell she was torn. She wanted to be free, but she also feared the consequences of that freedom. "Lyra?" Ethan called, walking toward her. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place.
Yes.
She smiled faintly. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she said softly. "About what we talked about leaving." Ethan stepped closer, offering her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "We're in this together." Lyra nodded, but there was still hesitation in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this, Ethan. I don't know if I can walk away from everything I've known." Ethan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to walk away from it all at once. We'll take it one step at a time. We'll find our own way, Lyra. And you don't have to do it alone. I'll be with you every step of the way." She looked at him, searching his face for any signs of doubt. But all she found was certainty. Ethan had made up his mind, and now he was giving her the strength to do the same. "I've never been given the chance to choose before," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But now I get to decide. And I want to decide for myself." For us, Ethan's heart swelled with pride. She had made her choice. And now she was ready to take the first step toward freedom. "Then let's go," Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's find our future." Lyra smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. Together, they both turned to the starship that awaited them. The journey ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges. There would be dangers. But together, they knew they could face anything as they boarded the ship. The doors sealed behind them, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. This was it. There was no turning back now. He had left Earth behind, and he had chosen to follow Lyra into the unknown. The ship lifted off from the base, leaving the planet below. As they soared into space, Ethan looked out the window at the stars stretching out before them. He didn't know where they were going, but for the first time in his life, he didn't need to know. He didn't need to have a plan. He just needed to be with Lyra. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked, breaking. The silence. Ethan turned to her, a smile playing on his lips. "I don't know yet, but I think that's the best part." Lyra laughed softly. "I never imagined I'd be on a journey like this. I always thought I knew what my life would be like. But now everything's different. Everything feels ... possible." Ethan reached out and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "That's because it is. Anything is possible now." They sat in silence for a few moments, letting the vastness of space envelop them. The hum of the engines was the only sound, and the stars outside seemed to offer endless possibilities. For the first time in a long time, Lyra felt free. Wasn't weighed down by her responsibilities. She wasn't bound by anyone's expectations. She was her own person, and she had chosen a path that felt right for her. Ethan watched her, his heart full. He knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. There would be times when things would be difficult, when they would question their decisions. But for now, all that mattered was that they were together. "I'm glad you're here," Lyra said, her voice filled with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "I'm glad I'm here too, Lyra. I wouldn't be anywhere else." The ship continued its journey through the stars, carrying them both toward an uncertain future. But as they sat there side by side, they both knew one thing for certain. They had made the right choice. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would make their own destiny. And for the first time in a long time, the future seemed full of endless possibilities. The days after leaving the base felt like a whirlwind to Ethan and Lyra. as they traveled farther from the human colony. The familiar sights of Earth slowly disappeared from view, replaced by the vastness of space. The starship they were on, sleek and quiet, hummed as it glided through the stars, carrying them into an uncertain future. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt free. There was no mission to follow, no orders to obey. There was only the open road ahead and the promise of new adventures. But as much as he embraced the freedom, there was still a part of him that wondered if they had made the right choice. They ever find a place where they truly belonged? Would they always be searching for something they could never find? Lyra, too, was lost in thought. She gazed out the window at the swirling stars, her mind racing with questions. She had spent so much of her life doing what was expected of her, living a life of duty and obligation. Now, for the first time, she had chosen her own path. But the weight of her past still lingered in her heart. Her people would never understand why she had left, and part of her feared their judgment. Yet, in Ethan's presence, she felt something she had never known before: peace. It was a quiet peace, like the calm after a storm. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time in her life, she was doing something for herself. She was choosing her own destiny, and that choice filled her with a sense of freedom she had never experienced. Ethan sat next to her, glancing over at her as she looked out at the stars. He could see the sadness still lingering in her eyes, and he knew that the decision they had made wasn't easy for her. She had left behind everything: her title, her people, her home, for something unknown. And that wasn't something she could just walk away from without feeling the weight of it all. "Lyra," he said softly, breaking the silence. "Are you okay?" She turned to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I think so," she said quietly. "It's just hard to leave everything behind. You don't know what it's like to have your entire life mapped out for you. Every decision, every move was planned long before I was born. And now now I'm just here with you." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy for her. He could never truly understand the weight of her responsibilities, the pressure of being born into a life that wasn't her own. But he knew what it felt like to be trapped by expectations. They weren't so different after all. "You're not alone, Lyra," he said, his voice steady. "We're in this together. Whatever happens, I'm with you." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. The warmth of his touch was a comfort, grounding her in the midst of everything that was happening. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand. "You don't need to thank me. I'm here because I want to be." The ship continued its journey through the stars, and as the days passed, Ethan and Lyra began to settle into a new rhythm. They explored the ship, talked about their hopes and fears, and spent quiet evenings together under the stars. It was a strange, peaceful kind of life, but it felt right. For the first time, they weren't running from something, they were running toward something, toward a future they would shape together. One day, after a long morning of talking about their plans, Lyra turned to Ethan with a serious expression on her face. "Ethan," she said softly, "there's something I need to tell you about the future, about what I want." Ethan looked at her, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the table between them. "I want to find a place where we can be free," she said. "A place where we don't have to hide, where we can be ourselves without worrying about what anyone else thinks. I don't want to live in the shadows anymore." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding her words more than she could know. "I agree. We've already left everything behind. We've already taken the hardest step. Now it's time to find our own place, our own life." Lyra's eyes sparkled with hope. "But where do we go? Where do we start?" Ethan thought for a moment, looking out the window at the stars. "I don't know yet," he said. "We'll figure it out. We'll find it. A place. Maybe it's out there in the stars. Maybe it's somewhere no one has ever been before." Lyra smiled, her heart lifting at the thought of a new beginning. A life without restrictions, a life where she could choose who she wanted to be. The thought that Ethan would be with her made everything seem possible. "We'll find it," she said with conviction, "together." As they spent the next few days charting a course through the stars, they came to realize that their journey wasn't just about finding a physical place. It was about finding themselves, about creating a life that was truly their own. They would face challenges, of course, and there would be days when the future seemed uncertain. But as long as they had each other, they knew they could face anything. Weren't running from their past anymore. They're moving toward a future they could shape with their own hands. And that future, though unknown, was full of possibilities. As the days turned into weeks, and the stars passed by outside their window, Ethan and Lyra found themselves growing closer. They shared their hopes, their fears, and their dreams. Talked about what kind of life they wanted to build. And though they didn't have all the answers, they knew one thing for sure. They were no longer bound by the past. They were free. "Wherever we go," Lyra said one evening, as they stood on the deck of the ship, watching the stars streak past, "I'm glad it's with you." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "Me too," he said softly. "Wherever we go, we'll go together." And as the ship moved through the vastness of space, they both felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for a future filled with endless possibilities. Hope for a life they could finally call their own. The weeks turned into months as Ethan and Lyra traveled deeper into the unknown. The ship glided silently through the vastness of space, its sleek hull cutting through the dark, endless expanse. The stars outside were distant and cold, but inside, the ship, warmth and possibility filled the air. They were no longer just two people escaping from their pasts. They had become something more, companions on a journey toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The challenges they had faced up until now felt small compared to what lay ahead. But for the first time, they were in control of their own destinies. Free to choose what came next, Ethan had never thought of himself as an explorer. He had always been a soldier, focused on following orders, living a life of duty and routine. But now, as he sat at the table in the ship's small living quarters, staring out at the stars with Lyra, he realized how much had changed. He had become something else. He had become a man of choice, a man with a future that was his to create. Lyra, too, had changed. The princess who had once been weighed down by the expectations of her people was no longer the same person. She had shed her old identity, the life that had been planned for her, and now she was free to become whoever she wanted to be. And she had chosen this, to be with Ethan, to build something new, something that was truly theirs. But the road ahead was still unclear. They had no destination in mind, no specific place they were heading. It wasn't about the destination, though. It was about the journey. And for the first time, both of them felt like they were moving in the right direction. One evening, after a long day of working on the ship's systems, Lyra walked over to Ethan, who was sitting in front of the ship's controls, the soft glow of the console lights reflected in her eyes as she approached him. "Ethan," she said, her voice gentle but filled with purpose. "What if we never find a place to call home? What if we're just drifting forever?" Ethan looked up at her, his eyes warm but thoughtful. "Maybe it's not about finding a place. Maybe it's about finding the right people to share it with. As long as we're together, I don't care where we go." Lyra sat down beside him, her eyes searching the vastness of space outside. "I know, but sometimes I wonder if we're just running away. I left my people behind. I left my responsibilities. I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back, and I'm scared that I might never truly belong anywhere." Ethan placed his hand on hers, offering a reassuring squeeze. "You belong here, Lyra. You belong with me. We've built something together, even if it's just the two of us." Lyra's eyes softened as she looked at him. She could feel the sincerity in his words. "I've never known what it was like to belong, not in the way you do. I've always felt like I was living for someone else. But now, I feel like I'm living for myself." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "That's all that matters. We're creating our own life, one step at a time." The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding they had grown to share. The ship hummed gently around them, and Lyra leaned back in her chair, letting herself relax for the first time in months. She didn't have all the answers, and maybe they would never find a place to settle. But with Ethan by her side, she felt like she could face anything. Days passed, and their journey continued. They encountered new planets and strange, unfamiliar worlds. They explored the stars together, learning new things and discovering places they never thought existed. Some worlds were peaceful and welcoming, while others were hostile and dangerous. But through it all, they remained together, a team, facing whatever came their way. One day, after a particularly challenging encounter with an alien species that didn't take kindly to their presence, Ethan and Lyra sat together in the ship's small lounge, recovering from the tension of the encounter. They had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation, but now sitting in the quiet of the ship, the adrenaline was fading, and all that remained was the comfort of being in each other's company. Lyra looked at Ethan, her gaze soft, but full of gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Ethan. You're always there when I need you, always ready to protect me." Ethan chuckled lightly, the sound filled with affection. "It's not just about protecting you, Lyra. It's about being there for you. You don't have to do anything alone anymore. We're in this together." She smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never known someone who cared for her the way Ethan did. It wasn't just about love. It was about understanding and support. And in that moment, she realized that she had found something far more important than a place to call home. She had found a partner, someone she could trust with her heart and soul. Ethan reached over and took her hand, holding it gently in his. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. That's the only thing I know for sure." Lyra nodded, her fingers tightening around his. Together, they sat in silence for a while, letting the peaceful hum of the ship surround them. The stars outside glowed softly, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the endless possibilities that awaited them. There was no destination, no end to the journey. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were no longer running away from their pasts. They were moving forward, step by step, hand in hand, into a future they could create together. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Ethan and Lyra continued their journey through the stars. They didn't know where they were headed, but they no longer needed to. With each passing day, they discovered that the journey itself was the destination. They were building something new, something all their own, and that was enough. Ethan looked out the window, his eyes tracing the stars as they passed by. For the first time in his life, he wasn't focused on the future. He wasn't worried about what came next. He was simply living in the moment with Lyra by his side, and that was all that mattered.